I'm looking at our guest's website, and on the homepage it says, if you knew who to talk to, what to say to them, and even when and where to do it, what would that do to your growth ambitions? Now, that's an interesting question. I'm curious as to how he would recommend we address the issue. We'll get into that in just a moment. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by sproutword.com. I'm Renee Koshy, and my guest today is Riaz Kanani. Now, Riaz, you're the founder and CEO at RadiateB2B. You've got 20 plus years of experience in advertising and marketing technology. You have previously built global video advertising networks, exiting your previous startup to Silverpop, before expanding Silverpop internationally, which was then bought up by in 2013, I believe. You've also sat on the DMA Email Marketing Council and taught in the Institute of Digital and Direct Marketing. Guys, I'm curious, was there a specific incident that triggered the journey to creating RadiateB2B into what it is today?
There are very direct links. When I left Silverpop and was thinking about what to do next, the obvious next step was to stay in MarTech and build the next thing. And at that time, I honestly was hugely bored by the whole MarTech world. It was very much the case of the same thing we built 10 years previously, but with big data or data science strapped on the back of it, sort of thing. And it didn't inspire very much, though I was very interested, obviously, in the big data side. And so I actually went away and left the space not too far away. I was in the AI space, and we were looking more broadly than marketing, but we were still looking at marketing. And then, and I should just say, and Silverpop had a B2B marketing automation solution. They were one of the early players in that space, similar to Marketo and Eloqua, etc. And you fast forward to 2016, 2017, and we started to see changes, a couple of things. We started to see the first signs of real change happening in the way people bought B2B, the way they were behaving and researching online. We were starting to see big changes. We also were seeing very large increases over the span of a bunch of years in acquisition costs. And so I use the sort of metaphor of the oil sands over in Canada, where they're not economical if the price of oil is under $100 a barrel. But as soon as it goes over $100 a barrel, it's a profitable venture. And in the same way in marketing, what's happened is the acquisition costs have grown so much that actually we can start to use different techniques that previously were just too expensive to do. But today, with the way the buyer's changing, we can leverage data much more easily from outside your website, not just your own first-party data, to basically improve the buying experience. And that's how we set up RadiateB2B.
Very interesting. Would you say that things have changed a little bit in terms of being able to access data as freely since you first began?
Yeah, you know what? I hadn't realized how big the change was going to be. When we thought back then, we could see the change in buyer behavior online, and we were very focused on marketing. Fast forward to today, and I think there's three big trends or three big things happening that are all coming together at the same time to just create, for want of a better word, chaos. You've obviously got the uncertainty in the market. That's going on at the moment. The economic challenges, the turnover in people, and a lack of desire to invest is having or forcing companies to reassess the way they go to market. So that's the first big thing that's happening. When things are working, you don't have a huge incentive to change things, but things aren't working, and so we're seeing that change. The second one, not really a surprise at all, artificial intelligence. Every month that goes by, we see more and more things coming online. AI has been in marketing for over a decade, but the ease with which new entrants or people who haven't been using AI are able to take AI and leverage it within sales specifically, but also marketing. We're already seeing an impact, certainly in people's inboxes. And we can come back to that maybe a bit later. And then the third thing is the new buyer, which is the evolution of what we were seeing back at the very beginning. And it's not just marketing, it's sales as well. Mm-hmm. And that's being driven very much by a generational change. So we've gone from the majority of buyers being not born with the internet, but have learned to use the internet, to a generation of people who've been born with the internet, have grown up with it. They know how to use it, although they're comfortable using it. And more importantly, they're comfortable communicating over it. And that's one of the big changes, is Gen Z and millennials are very happy to go into forums, communicate on forums, communicate via instant messenger. There's a larger digital footprint than there was before. And that's led to a delay in talking to vendors, to the seller. Whereas before they would, in the golden days of sales, I call it in a way, before the internet, a salesperson would be brought into the sales process very early on, right at the very beginning, really, because that was the easiest way to learn what was available. Fast forward to the internet launching, and we started to see buyers brought in midway through, or even a third of the way through, sort of thing. Today, all the research suggests that you're 70 to 80% into the buying process. You've already got to the shortlisting stage before you're actively reaching out. So in your mind, you've already got 3 companies that you think are likely candidates. And so waiting for that reach out to have a conversation is very dangerous if you're not part of those 3.
Certainly. Makes a lot of sense. I'd love to dive into it a bit more. I'm also curious, given your journey today, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
My personal
area of strength.
Oh, my personal area of strength. I've always said that I love to build things. I like to create something that then has its place in the world, if you like, or is doing some value in the world. So that on the one side is what I like to do. I think my strength is both a strength and a weakness when you're building companies anyway, when you're creating companies, which is I have a decent record of knowing where markets are going and what's coming next. And the challenge, the downside to that is by the time is that I think it's a great opportunity, I go and build it, but it's a couple of years too early. And being a couple of years too late is actually much better than being a couple of years too early. Usually you want to time it better, if that makes sense. But that's what I love, so I have no qualms about it. Keeps me entertained, keeps me alive.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know?
So I think today it's one of those periods of time where actually everybody's on a journey together to a degree. I was looking at some trend charts of ChatGPT. New technologies come and go all the time. And when you look at trend charts, you'll see this nice curve going up, right? As more and more people. I remember back when HubSpot used to go on about inbound marketing when it wasn't a big thing, and I'd look at the curve and it'd be gently rising, and you could see it was a journey, but you still didn't know if it was going to succeed. You look at the curve for ChatGPT, and the awareness of ChatGPT has grown so rapidly that there's not many people, I think, in the professional world who haven't heard of it. The challenge, of course, today is, what does that mean? And that's why I say we're in that nice, what I call a nice comfortable time in a way, where there's a very small group of people who know an awful lot about what's possible, but all of that knowledge doesn't really help because it's not yet commercialized, it's not yet ready for market. ChatGPT is the beginning of that journey, not the end of that journey. We're starting to see the first hints of what comes next. beyond ChatGPT. And for those that aren't aware, that in my mind is agents. So this idea of somebody, or something, I should say, not somebody, that can actively work on your behalf autonomously. So rather than you having to go to a chat interface and type in what you want, it can go and attend an event for you and collect all the content from the presentations and feed it back to you and summarize it, and maybe even produce the best clip of the day, sort of thing. That's just one example of what's possible. And so I think that will be the next big part of that. But I love this period. This period is great when you have so much open space that you can extend in almost any direction, and nobody knows what's actually going to succeed at this point.
Fair enough. Just going back to what you were talking about earlier with some of the approaches to marketing and sales.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've seen shortcomings with the ways in which we traditionally approach these fields, and certainly the buyer has become a lot more aware of the opportunities and options that they have available. I still see and hear companies using email, phone calls, a reliance on content distribution. What's your take on all that? Are those still valid, or should we be literally looking at new paradigm shift, so to speak?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, let's take them in turn. Phone, I think, has been falling in performance for years. The availability of direct phone numbers is harder than ever. And so in that sense, phone is not a great channel to focus on. But, and this is the case, if you can get through to somebody on the phone, then you're going to have a much better conversation and a much better outcome, or more, if you're able to move somebody through the journey much faster than you can do by social or email. Absolutely. The challenge is getting through to them and being able to have a decent conversation. Email, I think, it's been the go-to channel for the last for however many years, but increasingly with the launches of Outreach and Salesloft, a very easy channel to adopt. I think that's become even easier in the last 12 months with the rise of AI-generated sales emails. But what we're seeing is performance dropping significantly as well. I think the bar, the way I look at or measure potential in a channel, or I think of things as like a relationship curve. So when you're delivering a TV advert, the requirement for a relationship with the person receiving the ad is very low, right? You don't need any relationship at all. You just need them to want them to consume it. To the very other extreme, which could be something like a knocking on somebody's door and asking to have a conversation. Let's face it, most people do not want to have somebody knocking at the door selling to them. And in that scenario, you have to have a really good relationship to be able to be invited in to sit down and have a conversation, sort of thing. With email, I think today, what's happened is the requirement for that relationship has gone up. So your affinity to the brand is higher, or it needs to be higher. Your view of the brand needs to be higher. And so therefore, a cold email going into someone's inbox is much less likely to succeed. And so in a weird sort of way, people's email lists of people who've actually actively opted in to receive emails from you just became more valuable. But the counter to that is all those email lists that you have of people who you're prospecting with just became less valuable. That's where I think email is. Social has been rising, especially since the pandemic, but it's an extremely noisy environment today. And it's very difficult to succeed in that place quickly. You have to build it over time. And that's, I think, one of the big shifts is, in a way, what's happening is you're reliant on a salesperson's ability to build relationships from afar and manage and maintain relationships over time that they may not be ready to buy today. But 6 months from now, are they going to remember you when they are ready to buy? And so that's my state of play. That's an extremely challenging place to be right now. But the rise in volume and the rise in noise makes me think that actually events face-to-face and more broadly, which would include digital communities, are the key places where companies need to play more and more at the moment. And be clever with it, because going to an event can cost a huge amount of money, but you can be clever about how you do those things so you don't have to fork out huge booth fees or sponsorship fees.
Right. Just on that, for us to be clever with using the opportunity. But
many years ago, there was a term guerrilla marketing. I don't know, I haven't heard that term in many years. I remember we hired a float and drove it down one of the major roads in London, which in hindsight it's not allowed. You actually need to go and get a license. It turns out we didn't realize it at the time. But we drove a float at 5 miles an hour down one of the busiest roads in London, which obviously caused huge traffic jams and a nightmare, but it got a lot of attention and everybody saw it. So it worked quite well, and we had to ask for forgiveness, obviously, for doing that. But it could be as simple as, I see a lot of side events happening at events these days. It could be things like that. It could be running your own event and alongside it, and getting people to come along into that.
That certainly provides a lot of food for thought there. But I'm curious, from the sound of what you said, it would seem that ABM and perhaps account-based advertising would seem to be the way to go, as well as communities and things of that nature. But I'm curious, for, say, someone starting up in the B2B space, that's an incredible challenge to get involved in those kinds of things straight off the bat. What would be your advice to people in such a position?
So it's always one step at a time. You can't build Rome in a day, is the saying. You've got to take it one step. And a lot of our clients will have been on that journey. So when they're very small organizations, what they tend to do is to use our website intent, so first party intent platform, and just start with that. Because what's happening, I talked a bit about the change in how people are buying, and they're doing more research before they contact the vendor. We know that during that period, they will visit the vendor websites once, twice, 3 times without ever converting. And so if you can pick up those signals, then your sales team have got an opportunity to be able to reach out and start having a conversation earlier. And so when you're small and you don't have all the big infrastructure that you potentially need to then start to do advertising, I'll come to that in a second, the ability to start with that intent data and model the behavior on the website so that it's only showing you the companies that are actually showing buying behavior, not a mass long list of all the companies that have been on your website, because a whole bunch of them are selling to you and a whole bunch of them are looking for jobs, and you don't want to care about those people. So that's an easy way to start, if you like, and starts to what I call shine a light on the dark funnel, this idea of the behavior that's happening that's invisible to you in sales and marketing. You can start to shine that light there. And then as you grow and you scale, you can then expand to third-party intent data, which then brings you insights from browser behavior across the internet. And again, just shines a bigger light on that dark funnel, right? And so that allows you to get started. But from the account-based advertising side of things, there's been a debate since forever. Like, I've been in the space for over 20 years, and there's always been this group of people who are massively pro-advertising, and this group of people are massively anti-advertising, right? And earlier this week, someone posted about how they won a deal of $120,000 off an inbound lead, and it came in and it closed within a week. So that's great. But that person did not just magically turn up and become an inbound lead. There was a whole host of things that happened before that inbound lead happened. Some of those may have been advertising. It may have been influenced by advertising. It may have been the content that had been produced. It may have been third party word of mouth through people, peer reviews, a whole range of things, right? For me, the challenge today to stand out in a very noisy world is you need to make sure that the person you want to sell to has both initially an awareness of who you are, to the brand, the logo, the name, what it stands for, and what is the problems that you solve. And you can write lots of content and you can build that community. But most people, in fact, I would go as far as to say, all great customers do not spend their time thinking about the vendors that are solving their problems. At most, they will think about them for 5 minutes here and there because they need a report, or the vendors themselves are not something those people spend time thinking about their company, what they need to do, what they need to solve, how are they going to get their bonus at the end of the year, right? And so you want to be able to get recall from somebody with advertising. And so now then, to bring it back circle to what you're saying about how it's complicated to adopt. It's not complicated to adopt. Depending on the channel, it can be expensive to adopt.
Yeah.
Display traditionally has been a very strong broadcast awareness channel, and you would have to spend 5 figures a month plus easily to reach a niche that was much, much broader than the niche you actually care about in B2B. But that is the way the market works. You have to go and sponsor an entire trade publication, even though you only care about a percentage of that trade's audience. What account-based advertising does is it says, actually, I care about these specific companies, and these are the companies that I want to see. So that brilliantly brings down the cost of display advertising to 4 figures rather than 5 figures. Some of our clients will spend as little as £1,000 a month sort of level. But the timing of when you should use display is often much later. There are other channels that you would start with. For example, we also support LinkedIn. I would be doing LinkedIn advertising most companies before I do display. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Typically, so display is very much brand-led, but link is much more part of reading, if you like. The adverts appear in the stream, so they're part of your day-to-day. You will see it as you read through the stream, and obviously you're more likely to engage with that content, therefore, as a result. And again, that just means that the buyer, when they're in that research phase, is starting to think of you as a major voice in the market.
Something that I think you alluded to, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, is that we should really be investing in our personal brands. In fact, I would go so far as to say that as we're looking to scale and grow, it would make sense to, at the very least, have a sales team that's of people who are certainly cognizant of the fact that their personal brands have value. So that we're essentially bringing in someone who stands out in a particular niche or space and can hit the road running, so to speak.
Yeah, there's no question from a sales perspective today, sales development perspective today, somebody who has the ability to stand out in social is going to have an unfair advantage over somebody else. And so the ability to build personal brand, I actually think the terminology is going to change over time. I think we're going to be entering a new phase in the idea of personal brand, if that makes sense. Maybe influencer is a better term for it. This idea that if you look back historically, a sales development person would have a very defined process. They were typically the most junior person in the sales team. They would have a list of contacts that they would go. They would probably have a script, a broad script that they would work off, and they would just hit the phones and send emails or post on social and bombard LinkedIn requests. And it was a very repeatable, scalable process. And it worked well enough that they could meet their targets and the company was happy with the return on investment. Today, the simple reality is that doesn't work. And if we're saying that you need to build a personal brand and be what that effectively is saying is that you need to be showing leadership within the space that you're selling into. That's incredibly difficult. You're asking the most junior person in your organization or in the sales team to basically go out and take a leadership position in the market. And so it's not impossible. It's absolutely possible. But how you go about doing it is not by just having the salesperson build a personal brand. You need a whole army or village behind that person or that team that's supporting them in what they talk about and how they talk about things, so that they can talk intelligently and coherently about what it is they're doing. So it's a much more consultative approach in a way than it is, I need to get you onto a demo with my AE because my goal type of thing. So it's a real I think it's a real challenge. I think the skill sets of SDRs therefore will shift quite dramatically. The challenge is going to be, how do you maintain an ROI from that team?
Perhaps a parallel track of thought here, does it make sense for the companies with existing lead generation programs to shut them down completely in favor of account-based marketing?
Yeah. Sales development teams have a huge place within account-based marketing. It's just not spray and pray as we used to call it in the email marketing world, right? Account-based marketing, maybe it's worth just quickly explaining it a little bit. The account-based marketing strategy is broadly made up of three different types, right? The one-to-one, more traditional strategic ABM approach, where you create a marketing plan for an individual account. A one-to-few, which is very similar to industry marketing, but not necessarily industry. And then one-to-many, which our most sophisticated clients are integrating into their demand gen programs, but in a way that allows them to actually understand individual companies' behavior rather than the broad demand-led approach. So those are your three strategies. The challenge for most ABM strategies is one of knowing enough about the target account. So all companies should know what their ideal customer looks like, and they should have a good idea of what their buyer looks like. And buyer today could be anything. The numbers are, it's an average of 8 to 9 people involved on the buyer side in any buying process for enterprise sales. I think it was Gartner who came up with that number. So the simple reality is that hopefully nobody is sitting down and doing the research for 8 to 9 people in every account that they want to target this year at day one, because very quickly they'll go bankrupt. The amount of time and investment it takes to do that is off the charts. And when we know from our advertising campaigns that we do, that over a quarter, 20 to 30% of the companies that you target, assuming you're targeting enough companies, will be engaging with your content in some shape or form. So that suggests that 20 to 30% of companies every quarter are open to consuming or listening to the problem that you have got. That ties reasonably well to the old 5% of companies are in market at any one time sort of thing. That's the problem with at day one, is that you need, for you to warrant the level of investment for a strategic ABM or one-to-one ABM program, you need to have very large contract values to support that. I would argue 7 figures plus. For all the rest of us in the world who are selling contracts at £15,000-20,000 annually and above, we have to take a different approach. And that approach is very much what I call, you basically promote and demote. So you look at your broad ICP, your ideal customer profile, and you select however many companies, certainly at least 500, probably a lot of ICPs in the B2B space could be as big as 15, 20, 30,000 companies sort of thing. You narrow it down to your top 500, and then you start to put messaging in front of them. And that could be advertising, that could be trying to draw them into a community, whatever it happens to be. But based on their behavior, that then promotes them up. And it moves them to the next stage of your ABM program. And that allows you to ramp up the investment in an account over time and scale it. And the SDR is a key part of that, the sales development rep, because they often will take the earliest direct conversations with that account before you then bring in the AEs, obviously. But marketing will have done a huge amount of work specifically with those accounts to get them to that stage. And that level of identifying, we see something really interesting when clients adopt an account-based marketing approach. In theory, it's the same thing. Good B2B marketing and account-based marketing is the same thing. Like when you the tactics that you implement, the way you implement them should be identical. What's interesting is that because you are identifying the names of the companies, you know who the companies are that are in the list, you're now more averse to burning those companies. Right? If you've got a list of 100 companies and you know that doing this tactic is going to piss off 10% of them, when it's just this black hole or this big bucket of companies that you've got no idea who they are, you don't care. You don't realize it. You don't think about it. You're like, oh, okay, I'm going to drive this much in terms of returns, so therefore I'm going to go and do it. With an ABM program, you're very aware of your relationship with every company. And the way you decide things is really around what's the right message for this company. So you might end up segmenting more than you would do when you're just taking a normal B2B marketing approach. And so you can be more personalized, you're more likely to engage and cut through the noise today.
Right, makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, you talked about looking at building out a community.
Yes.
Yet building a community alone isn't sufficient for a scalable business. I was wondering, could you elaborate on what you could be the central factors needed for scalability in the current B2B environment?
I think any large B2B company should be aiming to have their own community that they maintain and grow over time. I think that's almost a prerequisite today, and certainly community can mean different things. Right? Community doesn't necessarily mean a forum where, a Slack chat group, for example, doesn't necessarily have to mean that. It could mean, like we've seen a whole bunch of the major tech vendors go and do, which is to go and buy a big trade publication and have direct access there, and their community is all the members of that trade publication, and they're building their community via content. In essence, the point is that you need to build an audience that you have control of, that you can grow over time and maintain and take a leadership position on. It's really easy when you're a very large organization to be able to invest the amount of money and effort to do that. The challenge, I think, is when you are smaller and trying to scale. Running and maintaining your own community is extremely difficult because it takes a huge amount of time and it takes a huge amount of effort. And again, there's ways to, get around it. So we have, as Radiate, a B2B sales and marketing leadership forum within the Guild platform. The Guild platform is a community platform that you sign up for, and it gives you access to all the different groups. So there's an inbuilt, the nice thing for us is there's an inbuilt audience already there. And so as a result, we've got marketing leaders and sales leaders from Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, lots of the very large organizations all able to take part and interact. The other side of that, I think, is, again, that still takes a lot of time. Leveraging other communities can work just as well, and if not better, in the early days. We found a very strong community within Reddit, for example. So already an audience there. There's channels around sales and marketing going into there, and quite obviously, what you're not doing is going into there and selling. It's not about going in there and then actively selling your product. It's about going in there, adding value, showing leadership, and contributing to the community. And just by doing that, you become a respected person within that community, and therefore the sales will come as a result. But that's when you've got your KPIs and your quarterly, it's the end of the quarter, that's not the place to be, really, going in, and that's not how you get to your quarter target if you're late and aren't going to meet the target. That approach isn't going to work.
Obviously, doing these sorts of things takes time, at least to build relationships and be that trusted advisor where you can actually enter into a sales conversation. And given the pressures of meeting quotas, at least the pressure on salespeople, and perhaps in the ABM situation, some marketing as well, to meet these quotas on a quarterly basis, etc. What would be your suggestion to folks who find themselves in that tight corner, so to speak?
Like all things, there are long-term strategies and short-term strategies.
Yeah.
The easiest comparison is, in my mind at least, is the difference between SEO and PPC, right? You invest in PPC because you know there's going to be companies that you've missed that you need to catch. And so it's very expensive on a cost per opportunity standpoint, but you've missed them. That's the only way you can catch them. Whereas the SEO approach will take months and months, but if you do it right, you will catch those people earlier, especially if you tie it with intent data, obviously off the back of it. I don't have an answer beyond that, really, in terms of, because I think the answer is very different today for each company. And I think depending on the product, depending on the service, depending on the market. I'll tell you another story. There's an ad. When you're putting ads together, the creative is extremely important. And in the UK and the US, if you put a blog post on your ad and try and drive traffic to your site, it's extremely likely it will fail, because if it comes across, assuming it's coming across as a blog post, because the audience is so inundated with content that they just feel like it's not going to add value, so it's not interesting to them at all. In other countries, actually putting that blog post onto a banner works absolutely fine and will drive the return. And in a way, this goes right the way back to account-based marketing, right? You have to know your market, know your audience. In a way, that's the beauty of marketing. Everything changes every single year. We have to reinvent ourselves and find new ways to cut through the noise. But the fundamentals don't change. Know your market, know who they are, know where they are, figure out how to reach them and get in front of them.
I'm also thinking, considering the evolving landscape of B2B sales and marketing, what unconventional or unusual strategy have you found to consistently impact revenue growth? Given what we've talked about.
I'm a bit biased here, obviously, because I would say increasingly now technology companies have adopted intent data. So much is happening in that dark funnel that if you aren't shining a light on that activity, then you are coming to opportunities late. And that, I think, gives you an unfair advantage. The ability to personalize and actually do things that people don't expect. For example, there's two ways to do things people don't expect, right? To expand a little bit. There's the in-your-face unexpectedness, which jars you out of the flow that you're in and grabs your attention, like the Budweiser ads back in the 90s, showing my age a little bit. Those sorts of things can work very well, and they will always work, I think, very well. The other way to do something unexpected, though, is to go the other way, which is to actually reduce the friction and remove effort from the journey. And by personalizing, whether in our case it would be personalizing advertising, right down either to the company or the industry, what happens is that you're stopping the need for the customer to interpret your content. For example, they see an ad for the problem they're solving, but it's about another industry. Now I need to come through, I need to read that, I need to translate it for my industry and see if it actually will work, because I think it will solve the problem, so let's have a look. Actually, if you personalized it, you don't need them to translate at all, because you're talking in their language, you're talking about their industry. And those are, I think, today, the two ways that you have to approach things, and you have to think actively about how you're going to do that.
In the space of ABM, account-based advertising, would you say that there's perhaps a couple of areas that you find doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
That's a good question. I don't know if this doesn't get much airtime, but it needs more airtime, so I'm going to say this. The number of times people don't care enough about their data. So the ability for your ABM campaigns to succeed is entirely reliant on the quality of your data. If we've had the number of times, not just at Radiate, but even previously, we'll see companies that have not been in business for over a decade, and yet they're being targeted for an ABM program. It's almost laughable. It's almost and the simple reason is often because it's been outsourced to somebody who isn't really au fait with the market that they're pulling together the data for. And so for whatever reason, it's been missed. But actively looking to keep you don't need, I used to be many years ago a proponent for trying to get your data to be always 100% clean. I think any marketer has to be comfortable with their data not being 100% clean. The challenge, I think, for me today is we've got too comfortable with it. We've got too comfortable with data not being clean, and we've gone too far the other way. We need to pull back a little bit and go, actually, we do need to invest in our data, because the quality of our data is what's going to drive the success of our go-to-market programs. So that's what I would say.
So, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
My top takeaway? I would say my top takeaway from this would be to understand the change in the buyer. Okay. Honestly, that is the key. If you know how the buyer is changing, that will drive how you decide what you need to invest in and what you need to change, no matter who you are.
If listeners are curious and want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Once a time when I'd say LinkedIn and Twitter, but today the best way by far to get hold of me is LinkedIn. Connect with me on there. Happy to continue the conversation.
Okay. And your company website is RadiateB2B.com, is that correct?
Yeah, that's the place.
Okay. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure. It's been really good to talk to you.